Why was the desert so quiet? Not the kind of silence that follows peace, but the kind that follows ruin. The kind that waits for someone to realize everything, gone. The Afghan night had ended hours ago, but the air still carried smoke and dust, thick as grief. Somewhere inside that gray haze, Lena Cross walked, slowly, methodically, through what used to be forward operating base Viper. Her boots crunched over broken glass and twisted metal. The sun hadn't risen yet, just a dim outline of light seeping over the horizon, revealing shapes that were once tents, once trucks, once people. Now just ashes. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. Tears were for when there was still something left to lose. They'd called her Quiet Hawk. The sniper who never missed, who could wait 11 hours without moving, without even twitching a finger. But today, waiting had a different meaning. She wasn't waiting for a target anymore. She was waiting for a reason to still exist. She stopped beside a row of scorched canvas, what had been the barracks. Bent down, brushed away soot until she saw a piece of metal half buried in the sand, a name tag. Martinez. Her breath caught, but her face didn't move. She found another beside it. Jen. Another O'Connor. She collected them one by one, laying them in straight lines on the ground, 90 in total. 90 names. 90 voices that would never answer roll call again. 90 brothers and sisters gone while she lived. She knelt there for a long time. Long enough that the wind started moving the ash into little waves around her knees. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I promise all of you, I promise. It wasn't a prayer. It was an oath. Hours later, when the cleanup teams would arrive, they wouldn't find her. They'd find those tags in perfect rows, her rifle missing, her bunk empty. They'd write presumed KIA beside her name. But she wasn't gone. She was reborn. At that moment, she walked toward the collapsed communications tent, stepping over blackened wires and shattered antennas. Something inside her moved with precision, like muscle memory coming alive. Find the signal. Find the source. Find the truth. She pushed through a torn flap and found what she needed. A half-melted radio, casing split, but the internal circuit board still intact. She knew the design. Knew how to make it speak again. Hours passed as she stripped wires, spliced connections, rerouted power through a battery salvaged from a destroyed Humvee. Finally, static hissed. Her pulse didn't quicken, but her eyes narrowed. She input Echo Team's rotating encryption code. The one only their leadership was supposed to know. Then, through the crackling white noise, a voice. Male, calm, American. Package delivered, 90 confirmed, proceed to extraction point Tango 7. Lena froze. The voice was Taliban. Wasn't Afghan. It was one of theirs. Her breath came slow, controlled. Every instinct screamed to move, to act, but she didn't. Not yet. Someone had betrayed them. Someone wearing the same flag on their shoulder. She replayed the recording twice. Listened to the subtle inflection, the phrasing, the tone. Military precision, stateside education, officer-grade diction. Not a grunt, not a contractor. Someone higher. She sat back on her heels, staring at the dead radio, her reflection faint in the cracked display. Her face looked older than she remembered. Maybe it always had. The memory came like a flashbang, bright and sharp. 2 nights before the massacre. They were sitting around a barrel fire, Echo Team, 90 soldiers, one family. Someone had smuggled real coffee into camp, not the powdered rations they always joked about. They passed the thermos like a sacred relic, steam rising into the cold night air. Sergeant Hayes leaned across the fire, half his face glowing orange, the other half shadowed. "Quiet Hawk," he said with that easy grin. "You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't out here?" She smirked asleep. Everyone laughed. But Hayes didn't. He looked at her for a long second, eyes soft. "You're the best of us, Lena. You know that, right?" She hated that kind of talk. "I just squeeze triggers, Sarge." "Nah," he said, shaking his head. "You don't just pull a trigger. You decide who doesn't come home. That takes a kind of will most of us don't have. Promise me something." She frowned. "What?" "If I ever go down out here, you hunt the one who did it. You don't stop till you find them. Promise me that." She laughed. A quiet, nervous laugh. "Yeah, sure, Sarge, I promise." Now in the gray morning light, she whispered to the wind, "I'm keeping my promise." The smell of jet fuel drifted through the air, thick, wrong. Not the kind used in their sector. Her eyes scanned the wreckage. A black scorched line, fuel tanks ruptured, but this wasn't NATO stock. It was commercial grade, imported. She followed the trail. It led to what used to be the landing zone. No bodies. No wreckage. Just drag marks. Extraction point. Someone had come here after the attack. Not to rescue, but to retrieve. She crouched, brushed the sand aside, and found a single boot print. Different tread pattern, civilian issue. And beside it, something metallic glinting in the dirt. A dog tag. But not American. A forged tag, the kind insurgents used to mark fallen collaborators. Stamped crudely with a single word, "Roar." Lena stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it into her pocket. She didn't know the name yet. But she would. That night, she rebuilt what was left of the comms array, splicing cables from 5 different units. Her fingers worked with surgeon-like precision, no wasted movement. When the system came alive, she started decrypting 6 months of transmissions, thousands of data points, coded bursts, and archived reports. She mapped them out on a piece of canvas spread across the floor, marking coordinates with bullet casings. The pattern emerged like bones rising from the sand. 3 leaks in 4 months. Each time Echo Team had been ambushed. Each time by enemies waiting at their exact coordinates. The encryption key matched a rotating code known only to 2 people, Echo Team leadership, and 1 external intelligence liaison at Central Command. She accessed the personnel file. Colonel Marcus Webb. Deceased. Helicopter crash 14 months ago. Someone had been using a dead man's credentials. Lena's jaw tightened. Her eyes drifted toward the open desert, beyond the torn tent flap. Whoever did this thought they were untouchable, hidden behind ranks and layers of clearance. But she'd been trained to find what hides. She spent 3 days inside that shattered base, living like a ghost, moving between patrols, stealing food from supply drops, erasing her presence. They'd never see her. They'd never even know she was there. By the 4th night, she'd found it. A voice signature buried in one of the encrypted transmissions. American, male, late 30s. Distinct vocal fry on certain syllables. She ran a biometric match through Echo Team's classified system. 3 results. 2 retired. 1 active. Captain Vincent Rohr. Logistics Officer, Regional Command Center. Perfect position. Perfect access. Perfect cover. Lena stared at his photo. Square jaw, clean cut. The kind of face that looked good in recruitment posters. The kind people trusted. She memorized every feature. Every line. Every shadow. Then she packed her rifle, 3 magazines, a knife, and 1 name tag, Martinez's. She placed it inside her chest pocket, right over her heart. Before she left, she returned to the memorial she'd built from their tags. 90 pieces of metal, glinting faintly in the dawn light. She knelt, pressed her forehead to the ground. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she whispered. "Revenge is personal. This is for the next team, for the one after that. So they know betrayal has a price, so they know someone's watching." She stood, shouldered her rifle, walked toward the rising sun. Behind her, one tag sat apart from the others. She made it herself from a strip of shrapnel, etched with one word: roar. The wind lifted it gently, like a small metallic heartbeat. The first promise made, the first name chosen. By the time the sun rose fully, Lena Cross had vanished. No one saw her leave. No one saw her shadow move beyond the ridgelines. But out there, somewhere between vengeance and duty, a new legend began. A whisper in the enemy's radio chatter. A story told in fear. A question asked by those who'd once hunted others. Who hunts us now? And somewhere in the silence between the echoes, a woman's voice answered, calm, almost tender. "Justice does. They said ghosts don't breathe. They don't bleed." But in the Afghan highlands, something unseen was moving, and men were dying without warning. For 6 nights, the desert kept its secrets. Only the wind spoke, whispering through broken stone, carrying rumors from village to village. At dawn on the 7th, a young insurgent commander fell to his knees for morning prayer. He whispered verses into the sand. Then the sound came, a single crack so distant it seemed like the sky itself had sighed. He never finished the prayer. 900 meters away, Lena Cross exhaled slowly, eyes steady behind her scope. She didn't celebrate, didn't flinch. The world simply went still, the way it always did when she took a shot. Her breath was calm. Her heart beat slower than it had any right to be. She reached forward, picked up a small metal tag from the ground beside her, and placed it on her lap. Martinez. She looked through her scope again. The commander's body was still. A second later, she saw his guards running toward him, shouting in panic. The wind carried fragments of their fear. A woman's name whispered like a curse. "She hunts from the hills." Lena's lips moved, just enough to form a reply the wind wouldn't carry. "Good." She packed her rifle with mechanical precision, slid down the ridge face, and disappeared into the folds of the earth. That was the first. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like duty. But duty had a weight. It pressed down on her chest when she tried to sleep, when she remembered faces, voices, laughter around the barrel fire. On the 3rd night, she found the brothers. 2 men bomb makers, who'd built the devices that tore through Echo Team's perimeter. They were holed up in a mud compound, wires and explosives spread out like children's toys. Lena waited. Hours passed. Her breathing matched the desert's rhythm. In-out silence. When she fired twice, one for each heartbeat she'd felt through the scope. The shots echoed off the canyon wall and vanished into wind. She didn't move for another 20 minutes. When she finally approached, she stepped carefully around the debris, her rifle angled low. They were gone. She knelt between them, placed 2 tags, Chen and O'Connor, on their chests. The wind stirred the sand again, covering the tags halfway. She stood silent. A sound came from somewhere far off, a prayer call, the muezzin's voice rolling through the valleys. It was beautiful, so achingly human. For a moment, Lena's eyes softened. Then she turned away. By the 5th kill, fear had a name. They called her Alra al-Sakit, the silent spirit. Men refused to go out at night. Commanders moved in convoys under smoke cover. Even insurgent radios spoke of her in half-words, as if nomming her might make her appear. She heard the transmissions herself sometimes, intercepted through the system she'd rebuilt. They never realized she was listening. She kills from distances we cannot see. 11 of hours in 6 days. She leaves their own dog tags beside the bodies. Lena sat in the shadows of an abandoned village, cleaning her rifle as she listened. Her face was lit by the faint green glow of her screen. The names scrolled across her display, coordinates, targets, connections. Each one a thread tied to the betrayal that wiped out Echo Team. But one message stopped her hand mid-motion. A voice, different from the rest, younger, trembling. "Who hunts us now?" Lena leaned back, staring at the stars through the broken ceiling above her. Her breath came slow, even. "Justice," she whispered to the night. "Justice hunts you now." The ninth was the hardest. A teenage boy. 16 maybe. A spotter. She'd watched him for 2 hours through her scope. Watched him smoke nervously, hands shaking as he checked coordinates on a radio. Watched him take a small photograph from his pocket. A woman, maybe his mother, maybe a sister. He looked so young. He'd been there the day Echo Team died. He'd called out target positions over open comms. She remembered the sound of his voice in the chaos, calm, methodical, the way a child sounds when he's following orders he doesn't understand. She breathed in. Wind speed, 5 knots east to west. Elevation, 1,200 meters. Distance, 850. Breathe out. Hold. The world stilled. She squeezed. When the echo faded, Lena sat there for a long time, her fingers still on the trigger, the smoke curling from the barrel like a ghost leaving a body. She whispered softly, "Daniels." Then she placed his name tag on the ground beside her pack. The desert didn't care. It never did. But she did. Even when she wished she didn't. By the 11th kill, she was no longer just a rumor. She was an equation men tried to solve and failed. The 11th target wasn't an insurgent, it was an American. A private contractor. A liaison who had facilitated communication between Roar and the enemy. He'd known what he was doing. He'd signed off the betrayal like a business deal. Lena tracked him for 2 days through drone feeds she hacked from the ruins of Viper. She found him inside a compound, surrounded by guards and luxury. The kind of man who sold soldiers lives and then slept on silk sheets. She waited until nightfall. Watched the pattern of his movements. Waited until the guards relaxed. When he stepped onto his balcony to smoke, she took the shot. The bullet struck his chest. He dropped his cigar. It rolled across the floor, leaving a thin trail of ember light before fatting out. Lena watched until the flame died. Then she left. She didn't leave a name tag this time. She left a message etched into the wall with the tip of her knife. Echo 90. But that kill had consequences. Hours later, her position was compromised. They'd seen the muzzle flash. Tracked her shot. They thought they had her. Lena let them think that. Sometimes, letting your enemy believe the lie was part of the hunt. They laid a trap, a 2-story building loaded with explosives, baited with supplies, and placed in her supposed escape route. It was too perfect. Too convenient. She smiled to herself. At dawn, she approached the compound. Made noise deliberately. Let them see her silhouette in a broken window. Heard the crackle of their radios, the excitement in their voices. They were closing in. Then she slipped downstairs to the basement. Fuel drums lined the walls. For vehicles. She opened every valve, the smell of gasoline thick and heavy. Then she walked out the back, climbed the wall, and set up her rifle 400 meters away. When the first insurgent kicked in the door, his rifle discharged. One spark. That's all it took. The explosion tore through the dawn, a bloom of fire so bright it painted the sky orange. The heat hit her face even from that distance. She didn't blink, didn't look away. 12 men died in that blast. She counted them in silence. 12 more names that would never betray again. When the fire died, she walked back through the rubble, face streaked with ash, hair tangled and wild. She looked like a spirit born from the flames. A demon. An angel. Justice incarnate. In the ashes, she placed 12 more tags. Then she turned east. Toward the regional command center. Toward him. That night, Lena camped in the ruins of an old fortress overlooking the valley road. Her hands trembled for the first time in weeks. Not from fear. From exhaustion. From the weight of what she'd done. She took out the pouch she carried, the one that held the 90 tags. One by one she touched them. Some with blood still in the grooves. Some polished clean. Each tag was a heartbeat. Each one a reason she was still alive. She stared into the fire. Her reflection flickered in the barrel's glow, eyes hollow, face streaked with dirt, lips pressed tight against the tremor in her chest. She thought about Hayes. His voice by the fire. "Promise me." She whispered back, "I kept it, Sarge, but I don't know what's left of me now." The flames cracked. The desert wind carried a faint sound, like distant laughter. Or memory. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't the hunter. She was the survivor who wished she hadn't survived. By morning, the rumor had spread to every insurgent outpost across the highlands. They stopped calling her a ghost. They started calling her something else. The woman who hunts the hunters. Somewhere in a bunker, a frightened voice whispered, "Who hunts us now?" And in that silence between fear and faith, no one answered. But the wind did. It carried the sound of a single rifle bolt sliding into place. The desert stretched forever, a landscape of bones and whispers. Lena had walked through it long enough to understand. It wasn't the silence that haunted you. It was the sound of your own thoughts, echoing back unanswered. 3 days since the explosion. 3 days since she turned 12 men into ash and smoke. Now she moved through the mountain passes like a shadow among stones, following a signal that pulsed quietly through her earpiece. She'd triangulated Roar's communications. His encrypted bursts came from deep within the regional command center, 20 kilometers east of the Kandahar border. American soil, technically. But in war, lines blurred. Morality did too. Her boots left faint prints on the sand, soon erased by the wind. She traveled at night, slept in caves by day, rationed her water. There was no unit now, no command. Only a mission. And the 90 names she carried in her pack like silent ghosts walking beside her. She stopped at an overlook that night, the ridge falling away into a valley of lights. Below, the command center glowed against the dark like a small city, perimeter fences, lit in cold white arcs. She could see the movement of patrol vehicles, their headlights cutting predictable patterns through the sand. Beyond that fence sat the man she'd been hunting. Captain Vincent Roar. A man who smiled for cameras, who wrote reports about operational excellence and supply chain integrity. A man who had never seen a firefight up close, but had orchestrated one from afar that killed 90 of his own. Lena's finger brushed the trigger guard of her rifle. She could have taken the shot. She knew the angle, knew the distance. But something stopped her. Something deeper than rules or hesitation. Killing him now would make her a murderer. Not a soldier. Not the sniper her team had trusted to keep them alive. Justice, not vengeance. That was the line she'd promised herself she wouldn't cross. But the line was starting to blur. She moved closer at dusk, descending into the valley shadows. The outer fence was triple-wired, monitored by thermal sensors. She studied the pattern of patrols for 2 hours, one guard every 90 seconds, spotlights sweeping clockwise in overlapping arcs. When the moment came, she moved. Quick, silent. She crossed 30 meters of open sand on her stomach, heartbeat steady, breath measured. The wire cutters made no sound, except the faintest snip under her gloves. By the time the spotlight passed again, she was inside. Inside American territory. Hunting an American. She found shelter in the shadows behind a generator shed, close enough to hear the hum of the command center's heart, air conditioning units, satellite uplinks, the metallic rhythm of a machine that never slept. Through the narrow window, she could see the briefing room. Inside, officers in crisp uniforms gathered around a glowing table display, blue light flickering across their faces. And there he was. Roar. He looked smaller than she remembered from his photo. Younger almost. The kind of man who hid behind procedures and signatures. She lifted her camera, zoomed in. He was laughing. Talking to a general she didn't recognize. His posture confident, his expression clean. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. Her 90 lay in the ground, and he was smiling. Her hand tightened around the lens until her knuckles whitened. Then movement. A voice crackled through her earpiece. Static. Then faint English words, encrypted but clear. Ghost Division feed request. Confirm biometric ping. Lena froze. That was her program. Her creation. Echo Team's encrypted line still active. Someone was piggybacking on it from inside the base. She tapped into the signal using her portable receiver. Lines of data scrolled across her screen. It was the same voice from before, filtered through the same signature. Roar. He wasn't just a traitor. He was still communicating with the enemy. Her heart thudded once hard. She pressed her earpiece closer, listening. Package delivered, he said quietly. Compromised units neutralized. Ghost activity confirmed in Sector 9. Proceed with Phase 2. Lena's blood went cold. Ghost activity. Sir. He knew she was alive. And he was planning something else. A shout broke the silence. Guards nearby arguing. She slipped back into the darkness, crouched behind the generator as Boots approached. 2 soldiers, young, bored, maybe 20. One smoked. The other yawned. They didn't notice her in the shadows. Man, this heat's killing me, one said. You hear what the locals been saying about that sniper ghost? The other laughed. Yeah, fairy tales. Ain't nobody taking out that many targets solo. The first exhaled smoke, shaking his head. Still, I heard she was one of ours, some SEAL chick. They say she hunts the ones who betrayed her team. Damn if that's true. He trailed off, glancing around nervously. Lena closed her eyes. Listened to their words like they were ghosts themselves. Proof that her legend had already reached the walls of the command center. The irony cut deep. They feared a story, not the truth standing 5 feet away. Later, inside a half-collapsed storage hangar, she set up camp. Her flashlight flickered over steel crates and old equipment draped in tarps. She ate from an MRE packet, flavorless and dry, then opened her pouch of tags. 90 pieces of metal. She laid them out on the floor in rows of 10. Her fingertips traced the engraved names like braille, like a prayer. The silence pressed on her chest. For the first time in weeks she spoke aloud, voice cracking slightly. I don't know how to finish this. Her words fell heavy. There was no one to answer. Sleep came in fragments. When it did, the dreams came too. She was back at the fire with Echo Team. Martinez laughing, Hayes telling stories, the smell of burned coffee in the air. They were alive, all of them, faces glowing in the firelight. Hayes turned to her. "You find him yet, Quiet Hawk?" Her throat tightened. "I found him. And—" She looked around. The others were watching her, waiting. The laughter had gone. The fire dimmed to embers. "Do I kill him?" she whispered. No one answered. Then Hayes said softly, "Do what makes you human, not what makes you right." She woke with a start. Sweat cold on her skin. The hangar silent again. Outside, the first faint light of morning crept across the sand. By noon, she was ready. She'd hacked into the command center's internal system, found a maintenance crawl space that ran beneath the east wing, a forgotten tunnel from an older base built decades ago. Her equipment was minimal: rifle, knife, data drive, and one last name tag. Hayes. She slid it into her pocket, over her heart. If she didn't make it out, she wanted him to be the one who went with her. The tunnel was dark, narrow, and filled with dust. Her flashlight beam caught the glitter of old cables, the rusted edges of support beams. Each breath echoed like a heartbeat in a coffin. She reached a metal grate above her. Through it, she could see a corridor, soldiers passing, papers in hand, laughter, the sound of life continuing as if betrayal weren't walking right under their boots. She pushed the grate aside, climbed out silently, and moved down the hall. Her uniform was standard issue. She'd scavenged the patches and ID tag from a supply truck 2 nights ago. To anyone passing, she looked like just another operator returning from a mission. The trick wasn't to disappear. The trick was to look like you belonged. At the end of the corridor was a door labeled Secure Ops, restricted access. 2 MPs stood outside. Through the glass, she saw Roar again, talking to the general. Morrison she recognized from dossiers. She could read their lips. Years of sniper observation made her fluent in silent truths. Morrison's jaw was tight. Roar's smile too easy. She caught fragments. Echo Team, necessary losses. Containment, narrative control. If she's alive. The words hit harder than bullets. Necessary losses. That's what they called her brothers and sisters. Her hand drifted toward the pistol at her hip. But something inside stopped her again. Hayes's voice from the dream. Do what makes you human. So she did the opposite of what they expected. She didn't shoot. She recorded. She lifted her small drive recorder, aimed it through the window, captured every word, every expression, every sound. Evidence, not execution. For hours she waited. When the meeting ended, she slipped away the way she came, disappearing into the same shadows that had become her home. Outside the walls, she stopped beneath a lone acacia tree. The air was dry and still. She pulled the drive from her vest, stared at it in her palm. This was her bullet now. The proof. The justice. She thought of her fallen 90. Of Hayes's laughter, of Martinez's engine grease on his hands, of Chen's terrible singing. They didn't need vengeance. They needed truth. Her eyes lifted toward the rising moon. It glowed pale against the dark sky, like a single light refusing to die. She whispered, "I'm coming home, Sarge, but not how they think." Then she walked into the night, carrying the evidence that would bring her face to face with the very machine that had tried to erase her. Behind her, the desert was quiet again. Only the wind spoke soft, cold, eternal. And somewhere deep within that silence, the old question echoed again across the radio waves of men who still feared the dark. Who hunts us now? This time, even the wind had no answer. The desert had always been her element, its stillness, its patience, its silence. But now, walking through the gates of the regional command center, that silence felt different. It wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the system, the humming silence of power, of air conditioning units and servers, of paperwork erasing lives with the stroke of a pen. Lena Cross walked through it like a ghost that no one could see. Uniform pressed. Boots clean. Hair tucked under a borrowed cap. No one looked twice. That's how invisibility worked. You didn't vanish, you blended. The badge she wore was real. Lifted from a dead logistics officer 3 nights ago during a raid that would never be reported. It opened every door that mattered. And today, it would open one that shouldn't exist. The briefing room. Inside, General Marcus Morrison stood at the head of a long table surrounded by senior staff. Hollow eyes. Faces hardened by routine. He was speaking when she entered quietly, her boots soft against the tile. "Echo Team," Morrison said, his gravel voice cutting through the hum of machines. 90 personnel, wiped out 12 days ago, and now we've got an unauthorized operator taking justice into her own hands. 11 confirmed kills, 12 more in what locals are calling the fire from heaven. He looked around the table. "I want names, I want explanations, I want this stopped." Captain Vincent Rohr sat 2 seats to Morrison's left. Pressed uniform, clean shave, perfect posture. His expression practiced concern, the kind that came from years of lying politely. He spoke with rehearsed calm. "Sir, maybe it's disinformation. Locals exaggerate. We don't even know if it's really her." "She's not a myth," Morrison said sharply. "She's one of ours, Lieutenant Cross, SEAL Team Echo." Rohr blinked. "Sir, Cross is presumed KIA." "She's not." Morrison's tone cut deeper now. "She's been leaving name tags on every body she drops. Echo tags. This isn't revenge, it's exposure. Someone in our chain sold them out. Find me who." Lena stayed in the doorway, unnoticed, her shadow thin against the wall. For a long moment, she simply listened. Each word a knife turning in old wounds. Then she stepped forward. The door slammed behind her, echoing through the room like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every conversation died. She stood there, dusty uniform, torn sleeve, a faint line of dried blood across her cheek. Her eyes were ice, unblinking, alive in a way that made people instinctively quiet. "Lieutenant Cross," Morrison said slowly, disbelief cracking through his authority. "You shouldn't be here." She walked toward the table, each footstep deliberate, steady, controlled. "Neither should they, sir." Rohr's face paled. "What the hell?" "Quiet," she said softly. Something in her tone made even Morrison go still. Lena reached into her vest, pulled out a small USB drive, and slid it across the polished surface. It skittered to a stop in front of the general. "That's 11 hours of intercepted transmissions," she said. "Encrypted using Colonel Webb's credentials, the same ones used to send Echo Team to their deaths." Morrison's hand hovered over the drive, his expression unreadable. "This is a serious accusation, Lieutenant." "It's not an accusation," she replied, eyes never leaving Rohr. "It's proof." Rohr stood slowly, the movement too deliberate. "General, with respect, this woman, out of line. She's traumatized, she's rogue, she's—" "Sit down," Morrison said quietly. "Sir, I said sit down." The steel in Morrison's voice was unmistakable. But Rohr didn't sit. Instead, he took a small step backward, his hand brushing the edge of the table, fingers twitching toward his sidearm. Lena didn't move. Didn't blink. Morrison inserted the drive into the console. The speakers crackled, static filling the silence. Then a voice, male, calm, American. "Package delivered. 90 confirmed. Proceed to extraction point Tango 7. Payment in full as agreed." The room froze. The voice was Rohr's. For a long second, no one breathed. The playback continued, muffled background chatter, coordinates, supply codes, all traced back to him. Roar's face drained of color. "General, that's not me. It's been doctored, I swear." "Enough." Morrison's tone dropped to something dangerous. "MPs, conference room A now." Two military police officers stepped inside almost instantly, drawn by the change in tone. Roar's hand twitched toward his weapon. Lena shifted her stance, not reaching for hers, just ready. "Don't," she whispered. Something in her voice, soft, steady, final, made him freeze. For the first time, Roar looked at her not as a subordinate, not as a witness, but as the consequence he'd thought would never come. "You think this changes anything?" he said, voice trembling between anger and fear. "They'll bury it just like they buried them." Lena tilted her head slightly. "Maybe, but not before they bury you." Morrison nodded to the MPs. "Take him." The clatter of handcuffs echoed off the metal walls. Roar didn't resist. He just stared at Lena as they let him out, his voice a venomous whisper. "You think justice means anything here? You're still just another ghost, Lieutenant. They'll erase you next." She watched him go. And for the first time since Viper, she smiled. Not a smile of joy. A small, weary smile of completion. When the door shut, silence filled the room again. Morrison exhaled slowly. He looked at her for a long time. "You went outside the chain of command." "Yes, sir." "You conducted unsanctioned operations on foreign soil." "Yes, sir." He studied her. Not as a superior judging a subordinate, but as a man trying to understand what kind of soul survives what she had. Finally, he said quietly, "Justice will be done for all 90. Lena's gaze didn't waver. "It already has been." Minutes passed. The others left the room in uneasy silence, glancing at her as they filed out, half fear, half reverence. When the last door closed, Morrison leaned against the table, the weight of command heavy in his shoulders. He took off his hat, set it beside the drive, and said, "I read your file, Cross, before this." She said nothing. "You were never supposed to come back. Officially, you died out there." "I did," she replied softly. "Just not all the way." Morrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "I don't know whether to court-martial you or pin a medal on you." "Do neither," she said. "Just remember them." He nodded again, slower this time. Then something in his expression changed. Respect, maybe even a hint of admiration. "Go get cleaned up, Lieutenant. There'll be a memorial at dawn. You should be there." She hesitated. Then, "Permission to keep the name tags, sir." "Granted," he said quietly. "They're yours now. Carry them well." That night she sat alone on the barracks roof. The stars stretched endless above, the hum of the bass below. In her lap, the leather pouch of 90 tags gleamed faintly in the moonlight. She reached in, held one between her fingers. Hayes. The one who made her promise. She turned it over once, twice. The metal was cool against her skin. "Promise kept," she whispered. Then she closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming. At dawn, she stood on the parade ground. The sky was painted gold and pink, the air still. 90 folding chairs stood in perfect rows, each marked with a name placard, each facing a podium draped in the flag. All of them empty. They were for the fallen, not the living. Lena knelt in the center, placing the tags one by one in a circle around her, 2 feet apart, exact distance, as if precision could make the grief easier to bear. She moved slowly, deliberately. Each tag a name. Each name a memory. Martinez could fix anything, even broken hearts. Chin sang like hell but never stopped smiling. O'Connor sent half her pay to her mom in Boston. Daniels wanted to teach kids how to live after the war. 90 names, 90 stories, 90 futures stolen. When she placed the last one, Hayes, she stayed kneeling, her hands pressed to the earth as if she could touch them through it. Behind her, the sound of boots. Morrison stood at attention, hand raised in salute. He'd been there for 20 minutes, waiting for her to finish. He didn't speak, didn't move. This moment belonged to her. And to them. The sun broke the horizon, turning everything to gold. The flags, the metal tags, the tears that finally fell down her face. The base fell silent. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, watching. They'd heard the stories. They knew what she'd done. And why. There were rules in war. Chains of command. Laws written in ink. But there were older laws, too, the kind written in blood and brotherhood. You don't abandon your own. You don't let betrayal go unanswered. You don't let the fallen be forgotten. Lena had walked that edge between justice and vengeance, and somehow she'd kept her soul intact. Morrison approached her slowly, the folded flag in his hands. He offered it to her with a quiet solemnity that didn't need words. For Echo Team, he said. With honor and with gratitude. She took it carefully, the weight surprising her. Or maybe it wasn't the flag, it was everything it stood for. They were the best of us, she whispered. They were, he said softly. But so are you. She looked up at him, eyes rimmed red, and saw something she hadn't seen in anyone's eyes since the fire at Viper, pride. Not in what she'd done, but in what she hadn't. She hadn't lost her humanity. What happens now, sir? Morrison hesitated. Then quietly. Officially, you're being reassigned. Unofficially, there's a file on my desk. New unit, off-book operations. They're calling it Ghost Division. Her brow lifted slightly. The missions no one else can handle, Morrison continued. The people no one else can touch, unofficially. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I never had this conversation. You were never here. Echo Team was avenged by forces unknown. Lena nodded slowly. Some things happened in the light. Some things belonged to shadow. The world needed both. As she turned to leave, the soldiers began to sing. Low at first, then louder. A song that every warrior knows by heart. Brothers never die. Voices rose with the sun. 100 strong. A chorus for the 90 fallen, and for the one ghost who made sure their names would never fade. Lena closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. When she opened them again, she was smiling. A small, tired smile. But real. Some ghosts don't haunt. They guard. They wait. They watch. And when darkness falls again, when betrayal whispers in corridors and hearts turn cold, they rise. Not for vengeance. For remembrance. The world moves on faster than grief does. Wars end on paper long before they end in people. And sometimes, what remains isn't a battlefield, it's a heartbeat. 1 year after the massacre at Fob Viper, Afghanistan had changed. Convoys rolled down the same roads, flags still fluttered over the same bases, and new names filled rosters where old ones had been erased. But in the quiet corners of the war, where no reporters went and no missions were logged, Ghost Division existed. Unofficial, unseen, unclaimed. And somewhere in those unmarked files, under a clearance code that technically didn't exist, there was a single line. Operator Cross Lena J. Status deployed. Location unknown. The mountains were colder that year. Snow gathered early on the peaks, blurring the ridgelines like the world itself wanted to forget where one horizon ended and the next began. Lena moved through it as easily as she once moved through sand. Different terrain, same silence. She had grown leaner, quieter, harder to find. But inside, something had shifted. She didn't hunt anymore. She watched. Her new missions weren't about revenge. They were about prevention. Intercepted intelligence drops. Broken trafficking lines. Eliminating the quiet cancers that fed off war. No headlines. No commendations. Just whispers. Her last operation had ended at dawn in the Korangal Valley. She'd been tracking a militia cell with access to U.S. encryption tech, stolen from a black site. They never saw her. They never even knew what killed them. But when she returned to her makeshift shelter, there was a letter waiting, hand-delivered through a courier chain she didn't know existed. No markings. Just her name, written in a firm, deliberate hand. From Jen M. Morrison. She sat down on a crate, wiped the dirt from her fingers, and unfolded it. The paper was plain. The words were not. Lieutenant, the world's quieter these days. Maybe you had something to do with that. Command doesn't speak your name, but every operator out here knows your story, even if they don't believe it. They call you the Silent Sentinel now. Some say you're a ghost. Some say you're what conscience looks like when the uniform stops fitting. I don't need to know where you are. I just need you to know this. Justice is what men like Roar think it is. It isn't loud. It isn't televised. It's the act of still standing when the easy thing would have been to kneel. Keep standing, Cross. Morrison. Lena folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her jacket. Then she looked out toward the valley. The wind was sharp and clean, carrying the smell of pine and cordite. Justice. The word didn't sting anymore. It didn't burn like it used to. Now it felt still. Like water after a storm. She whispered to herself, I'm still standing, sir. Days later, she moved north, following another signal. A convoy route that wasn't supposed to exist, carrying crates marked humanitarian aid. She'd seen that lie before. From a ridge, she watched the trucks through her scope. 6 vehicles. Escorted. Well-armed. Too disciplined for bandits, too dirty for official forces. Her crosshairs traced the lead truck's windshield. A soldier's face came into focus, barely older than 20. He looked tired, scared, and too young to be the face of corruption. She didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she followed the convoy until it stopped at a mountain outpost. She infiltrated after nightfall, silent as memory. Inside, she found the truth. The crates weren't aid. They were filled with stolen tech, sold to the highest bidder. The same tech that had once been used to betray Echo Team. For a long moment, she stood there staring at the crates. She could have destroyed them. Could have left another explosion behind her like punctuation. Instead, she turned on her camera. Recorded the evidence. Her voice low, steady. Echo Team, this one's for you. We don't burn the world anymore. We just make sure the fire can't spread. Then she uploaded the footage to Morrison's private channel, wiped her prints, and vanished before sunrise. That night she sat beneath a ridge line, her rifle beside her, the firelight catching on the dog tags in her hand. They clinked softly like wind chimes. She stopped wearing them around her neck. Now she carried them in a pouch over her heart. She reached in and pulled one at random. Daniels. She smiled faintly. He wanted to teach kids, she remembered. He would have hated what she'd become. But maybe, somewhere in the balance, he'd understand why she had to. She whispered into the cold air, You got your classroom, Daniels. I just changed the subject. At the edge of the firelight, the desert turned to shadow. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled through the mountains. Lena lifted her head. It wasn't thunder. It was artillery. Another war, another valley. Different uniforms. Same story. She packed her gear and started walking. each step slow, deliberate, measured. The sound of her boots on the frozen earth was steady, almost rhythmic. A heartbeat. Her heartbeat. Echo Team's heartbeat. The days blurred after that. Missions that didn't have names. Messages written in code, passed through hands she'd never see again. Sometimes she didn't even know who she was saving. That was the point. Once after an op in the Helmand province, she'd stopped at a small village. Kids were playing in the street, barefoot, wild, laughing. She hadn't heard laughter in so long, she almost didn't recognize it. A little girl ran up to her, offered her a piece of flatbread, smiling shyly. Her hands were dusty, her eyes bright. Lena knelt to accept it. The girl pointed to the rifle slung across Lena's back and said something in Pashto. Lena didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. A question. The village elder standing nearby translated softly. She asks, "Are you the woman who hunts monsters?" Lena looked at the child, at the innocence still untouched by war, and managed a small nod. Only the ones that forget they're human. The elder smiled faintly, but his eyes were sad. You will always have work then. Lena returned the bread to the girl, half of it. Then I'll never go hungry, she said quietly. That night under a cold blue moon, she opened Morrison's letter again. The paper was creased, worn at the edges. She traced the signature with her thumb. A thought came unbidden, simple, heavy, undeniable. What happens when justice runs out of names? She didn't have the answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe the world didn't need more answers, just fewer lies. She tucked the letter away, pulled out the dog tags, and whispered the names again. Not as a roll call this time. As a prayer. Morning found her at the ridge. Below, the world spread out in colors of rust and gold. In the distance, a convoy of soldiers moved along the valley road, young faces, new uniforms, laughter rising faintly through the thin mountain air. Lena watched them go. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the urge to follow. They didn't need her shadow anymore. She turned west, toward the sun, toward the next mission that would never officially exist. As she walked, she spoke softly, voice lost to the wind. They asked who hunts the hunters. I guess I do, but only until the world remembers why it shouldn't have to. Her steps faded into silence. The wind carried her words away, scattering them like ashes into the dawn. Months later, in an office somewhere deep in a government complex, General Morrison sat at his desk. The morning heat pressed against the windows. On his desk lay a file stamped with clearance codes he didn't recognize. Operation Silent Oath. Agent L. Cross. Status deployed. Location unlisted. He opened it carefully, like a man holding scripture. Inside, a photograph. Grainy black and white. Lena Cross, full camouflage, rifle slung across her back, looking directly at the camera. There was a hint of a smile on her lips. Not the smile of someone who'd lost everything. The smile of someone who'd found something new. Purpose. Morrison closed the file, exhaled and whispered. Some ghosts don't haunt, they guard. Then he locked the file away. Some things weren't meant for reports. Some stories didn't need endings. That night in the highlands between Afghanistan and Pakistan, Lena walked along a path no map acknowledged. The air was thin and cold. The sun had just set, bleeding red over the ridges. She paused at the top of the trail, looking back the way she'd come. Somewhere beyond those mountains, people slept safely because people like her still walked the edges of the world. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the pouch of tags, and let them jingle softly in her hand. Her thumb brushed over the last one. Echo 90. A small smile crossed her face. I'm still here, she said softly to the wind. I'm still watching. Then she turned toward the horizon, toward a sunset that painted the sky in colors that didn't have names. Her silhouette blended with the last light, her figure small but steady against the vastness. Somewhere out there, someone would betray again. Someone would fall. And someone would rise. Because ghosts don't rest. They wait. Legends travel faster than truth. By the time Lena Cross reached the next war, her name had already gotten there first. They whispered it in the mountains of Kurdistan, in the jungles of Sudan, in alleys where deals were made with guns instead of words. They said she never missed. They said she didn't breathe. They said she was already dead. She let them believe it. It was easier that way. A ghost didn't have to explain why she kept walking. Her orders came through at dusk, no insignia, no name, just coordinates. A small village on the edge of a conflict zone. Objective: confirm or neutralize asset leak inside humanitarian operations. Lena had learned to read between the lines. It meant someone selling secrets again. She checked her rifle, adjusted the scope. The wind bit hard tonight. The kind of cold that stung the lungs. Perfect weather for ghosts. She moved under the cover of cloud, silent, steady. Her steps barely disturbed the frost. The village below flickered with lantern light, shadows of people moving like whispers behind thin fabric walls. This time, though, something felt different. Not the usual tension of the hunt, something else. Something alive. Children's laughter drifted up through the wind. It stopped her mid-step. She hadn't heard that sound since the small Pashtun girl who'd offered her bread months ago. That same tone, pure, unguarded, untouched by the politics of men with flags. She lowered her rifle and crouched near the edge of the ridge, studying the light below. She saw no guards, no weapons, just families. Refugees. Her comm crackled. A man's voice, steady, familiar in rhythm if not in tone. Operator Cross, this is Command Node 7. Confirm location visual. I have it, she whispered. Proceed with objective. What's the leak, she asked. Static. Then, humanitarian lead, Dr. Amira Yousef, suspected data relay to foreign intelligence. Lena frowned. A doctor. She'd seen that pattern before, targets wrapped in justification. Sometimes the system sent you to clean up its own mess. Copy, she said. But her voice carried hesitation. A dangerous thing for a ghost. 2 hours later, she reached the perimeter. The doctor's tent was marked with a faded red cross. Inside, the shadow of a woman moved softly between patients, her voice calm and low. Lena watched through the fabric wall. Amira was maybe in her early 30s. Hair tied back, hands steady as she changed a bandage on a boy's arm. She looked tired, but there was a kind of unshakable patience in her every movement. The kind of patience Lena remembered from another life, when duty still had meaning. The boy looked up at her, whispering something in a language Lena didn't understand. Amira smiled gently. The kind of smile that didn't belong in war. Lena's rifle felt heavier suddenly. She lowered it, heart tight against her ribs. Her earpiece crackled again. Operator Cross, report. She didn't answer. Confirm status, do you have the target? She exhaled slowly. Visual confirmed. Execute, authorization Delta 17. Her finger brushed the trigger. The world narrowed to the scope, the thin thread between life and the cold math of a mission. Then the boy laughed again. Just once. A short, unguarded laugh that cut through her focus like light through fog. She blinked. Her scope drifted off target. Command, she said quietly. This isn't an intel leak, it's a field clinic. Static. Then the voice hardened. "Operator, your orders are clear." She stayed silent. The wind howled softly through the rocks around her. Below, the doctor continued her work, unaware that justice, or what passed for it, was watching her through glass. "Operator Cross," the voice snapped, "acknowledge." She reached up and pressed a finger to her comm switch. Click. Silence. No more voices. No more orders. For the first time since Viper, Lena disobeyed. She stayed there until dawn. Watching. Protecting. When soldiers came hours later, mercenaries wearing no flag, Lena was ready. She expected them. You didn't send a ghost after a doctor unless someone else was coming to finish the job. The first man never saw her. The second dropped before his weapon cleared his holster. The third managed a single radio call before the bullet silenced him mid-word. The last one turned and saw her silhouette against the ridge. His voice trembled. "You're her," he whispered. "The one who hunts." Lena lowered her rifle. "Not tonight," she said. Then she fired once. When the smoke cleared, Amira was standing in the tent's doorway. Dust clung to her scarf. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were steady. Lena approached slowly, weapon lowered. The doctor didn't step back. She just looked at her, studying her face as if recognizing something human beneath the dirt and scars. "You're not one of them," Amira said softly. "No," Lena replied. Her voice felt strange, foreign in her own mouth. "I was sent to stop you." "Stop me?" Amira's brows furrowed. "For what?" "For being alive, I think." For the first time, Amira smiled, not with joy but with understanding. "Then you failed." Lena almost smiled back. "Almost." "You should move your camp," she said. "Others will come." Amira nodded, still watching her. "Who are you?" Lena hesitated. 100 answers came and went. Finally, she said, "No one." The doctor studied her for a moment longer, then said quietly, "Then no one just saved 30 children." Lena turned to leave, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Behind her, the sound of life returned to the camp, voices, footsteps, soft laughter. The kind of noise that war always tried to silence. That night, high above the valley, Lena rebuilt her radio link. Static filled the air, then Command's voice cut through, sharp, angry, familiar. "Cross, you went dark, status report." She leaned back against the rock, the cold biting through her jacket. "Objective neutralized," she said evenly. "Neutralized?" "Yes, no further threat." A pause. Then the voice softened slightly. "Copy that, operator. You'll receive new coordinates tomorrow." She removed the earpiece, tossed it into the fire. The plastic cracked as it melted, the smell of burned circuitry rising into the air. For a long time she sat in silence, the fire reflecting in her eyes. Something inside her had shifted again, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not guilt, not regret. Something simpler. Recognition. She'd seen herself in that doctor. The same stubborn refusal to stop saving what could still be saved. It scared her more than any firefight ever had. She reached into her pack, pulled out the pouch of tags. 90 names. Her family. Her past. She added one more. Not a real tag, just a small piece of metal she'd cut from a canteen lid. She etched a single word into it with her knife. Mercy. Then she dropped it into the pouch and closed it tight. In the days that followed, word spread again. This time, the whispers were different. The ghosts still hunted. But she spared the innocent. She fought the ones no one could see. And she didn't always shoot. Even the enemy began to tell the story differently. They no longer spoke of a woman who brought death. They spoke of a shadow that arrived before it. Some called her a curse, others a protector, but all of them agreed on one thing. She was real. Weeks later, as dawn broke over another nameless mountain, Lena crouched on a cliff edge, binoculars pressed to her eyes. A convoy wound its way through the valley below, smugglers, not soldiers. Behind her, the horizon burned with morning light. She didn't take the shot. Not yet. She waited, watching as a single vehicle slowed. A boy jumped out, barefoot, thin, running ahead to clear rocks from the road. His father shouted something, laughing. Lena's finger left the trigger. She watched until the convoy disappeared into the distance. Then she whispered to the rising sun, "Not every hunt needs a kill." The wind carried her words away. The world for once felt quiet. That evening she found an old ridge post, half collapsed, rusted, long forgotten. She sat inside it, pulled out her notebook, and wrote something she hadn't written in years. For the 90, and the ones they never got to save. For every promise that still matters. For every shadow that chooses not to fall. She tore the page out, folded it neatly, and placed it in the pouch with the tags. Then she looked out at the horizon, the colors bleeding into night. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They asked who hunts us now. Maybe it's not me anymore." And for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, someday, it wouldn't have to be. Orders never come with warnings. They arrive as coordinates. Numbers on a screen, nothing more. But sometimes the danger isn't in the coordinates, it's in who sent them. 2 weeks after the village incident, Lena Cross received new intel. An encrypted burst. No signature. No origin. She almost ignored it until she saw the call sign, M7. Morrison's node. Except Morrison didn't send missions anymore. Not to her. Still, the message was simple. Meet at Grid 14 Echo 9er, 2300 hours, solo. The old instincts flared. Too clean. Too quiet. But she went. Because ghosts don't get to choose what haunts them. Night fell heavy over the desert. The stars hid behind dust. She moved across the flats, silent and low, rifle slung behind her. Each step whispered against the sand. The coordinates led to an abandoned airstrip, half buried under years of wind. Broken hangars. Twisted rebar. A single generator light humming in the dark. And there, standing in its pale glow, 3 figures in Black Ops gear. Unmarked. Unfamiliar. But the posture was unmistakable. Special operations. Her kind. The lead man stepped forward. Helmet off. Square jaw. Hard eyes. Major Thorne. Ghost Division Command. "Lieutenant Cross," he said. His tone wasn't greeting. It was paperwork waiting to happen. "Major." She kept her voice neutral. "Didn't expect company. You weren't supposed to." He tossed something onto the ground between them. Her old radio tag burned, half melted. "You went dark on a live op," Thorne said. "Broke comms, ignored orders, fabricated a mission report. I saved civilians. You compromised protocol." She looked at him for a long second, the cold wind pushing dust between them. "Protocol killed 90 soldiers once. I don't owe it anything." The 2 operators behind him shifted uneasily. Thorne's jaw tightened. "This division exists because you went too far. Don't make me prove we can go farther." Lena almost smiled. "You think you can hunt a ghost?" "No," Thorne said. "But I can erase one." He lifted his hand, signal for the men beside him. Lena's rifle came up before his did. A single breath, a half movement, Then the generator cut out. Darkness swallowed the airstrip. Silence. Then gunfire, short bursts slicing the night. Tracer rounds lit the sand for half a heartbeat. Lena rolled behind a broken wing strut, returning fire in measured rhythm. 3 shots. 3 sparks. 2 silhouettes dropped. The third, Thorn dived for cover. She heard his radio crackle. "Command, we have contact. Repeat, asset crosses hostile." A bullet shattered the radio before he finished. She moved. Vast. A blur through shadow. By the time the lights flickered back to life, Thorn was on the ground, his own weapon kicked away. Lena stood over him, breathing steady, muzzle aimed between his eyes. "Who sent you?" she asked. He spat blood. "Same people who sent you once." "That's not an answer." He laughed bitterly. "You think Ghost Division's about justice. You were the prototype, Cross. The proof that the system could manufacture ghosts who follow orders without question, until you stopped following them." Her stomach turned. "Test project." "Echo 90 wasn't supposed to die," he said. "They were supposed to measure how far loyalty bends before it breaks." For a second, the world tilted. Wind roared in her ears. She wanted to pull the trigger, end the sound, end him. But the part of her that had spared the doctor wouldn't let her. Instead, she stepped back. "Get up." Thorn blinked. "What?" "Get up and run." He hesitated. She chambered around. He ran. Her bullet hit the dirt half a meter behind his boots, close enough to remind him what mercy cost. When the dust settled, she knelt beside the fallen soldiers. One was still breathing. Young. Too young. She pulled off his helmet. A boy barely 20. Wide-eyed, terrified. "Don't move," she said gently, pressing a hand to his chest wound. He stared at her, lips trembling. "You're real," he whispered. "They said you were a story." "Believe the story," she said softly. "It'll keep you alive." She tore a strip from her sleeve, wrapped his wound, and dragged him into the shadow of the hangar. By the time dawn touched the horizon, she was gone. Morrison's message reached her 2 days later. Short. Encrypted. Urgent. "They're coming after you. Someone in command wants Ghost Division wiped. They think you know too much. Stay dark, stay alive." She read it twice, then burned it. So this was how justice ends, not with medals but with maintenance. The system cleaning itself of conscience. She moved north again, into the mountains, sleeping in ruins, traveling by night. Every radio frequency whispered her own name now. Asset cross, terminate with prejudice. For the first time, the hunter was the hunted. She reached the safe house at dusk, an old monastery carved into the cliffside. Inside, candles flickered against stone walls. A single figure sat by the fire. The last person she expected. General Morrison. He looked older. Tired. His uniform replaced by a simple jacket, his eyes carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too many necessary evils. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I could say the same to you." He gestured to the empty chair. She sat, rifle still across her knees. "They turned on me," she said. "I know," he answered. "I warned you. Ghost Division's gone. Most of it folded into another program. You were their legend, Cross. Now you're their liability." The fire popped between them. Outside, wind howled down the cliffs. "Why tell me?" she asked finally. "Because you're still the only one who believes justice means something, even when it costs you everything." She studied him. There was no rank here anymore, no orders, just 2 people standing at the edge of what they'd built. Morrison slid a data drive across the table. "This is everyone involved in the Ghost Project. Names, funding routes, internal orders. Enough to bury the program or light it on fire. Your choice. She looked at it without touching it. What about you? I'm already buried, he said quietly. Just make sure it wasn't for nothing. He stood, buttoned his coat, and paused at the doorway. Be careful who you save, Cross. Sometimes ghosts make more ghosts. Then he was gone. She stared at the drive for a long time. The firelight danced across its metal casing. Inside it, truth, one more bullet she could never take back. Outside, the wind carried faint static. Not the weather. A signal. Multiple. They'd found her. She packed the drive, grabbed her rifle, and moved through the tunnels. Footsteps echoed above. Flashlights cut through cracks in the stone. The hunt had begun. But this time, it wasn't vengeance. It was survival. And maybe, in a way, redemption. She set traps through the lower halls, trip wires, flash mines, motion sensors. Every click of a safety, every breath, every whisper reminded her of Echo Team. She wasn't fighting for herself now. She was fighting for the idea they died believing in. The first squad entered. The first trap detonated. Smoke. Shouts. Then silence. She moved through it like the shadow she'd become, one with the stone, with the dark. The rifle cracked once, twice, a controlled rhythm. When it was over, the monastery was quiet again. Too quiet. She stepped into the main chamber. There in the doorway stood Major Thorne. Bleeding but alive. Somehow he'd found her again. You can't win this, Cross, he said. You'll just prove them right. Maybe, she said. But at least they'll remember who started it. He raised his pistol. She didn't. For a moment, neither moved. Then a shot rang out, not hers. Thorne fell. Behind him, Morrison. Gun still smoking. You didn't think I'd leave you, did you? He said quietly. She stared at him. You'll be branded a traitor. So be it. He lowered the weapon. I'll buy you time, take the evidence and go. Tell the story right this time. She wanted to argue. She didn't. Instead, she nodded once. As she disappeared into the tunnel beyond, Morrison turned back toward the doorway, the sound of boots closing in. He whispered something she barely heard, words carried on the last gust of wind before the storm. Sometimes justice needs a ghost. Hours later, Lena reached the ridge above the valley. The monastery below burned, flames licking at the night sky. She watched until the roof collapsed, then turned away. In her pocket, the drive felt heavier than all 90 tags combined. Evidence, truth, and the burden of survival. She whispered into the darkness. For you, Morrison, for them. Then she vanished over the ridge, one shadow swallowed by 1,000. The wind carried the smell of ash for 3 days. It rolled down from the mountains like memory, heavy, uninvited, impossible to escape. Somewhere behind her, the monastery still burned. Somewhere inside it, Morrison's last stand became a story that no one would ever tell. Lena Cross didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because ghosts don't get to mourn. She reached the border at dawn. The sun crawled up from behind the rocks, painting the desert in colorless light. Her boots left shallow prints in the dust, the only proof she'd ever been there. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her hands shook when she poured the last of her canteen. But her mind was steady. The drive in her pocket hummed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Names, orders, signatures. Proof that Echo Team's deaths weren't an accident, they were an experiment. The Ghost Project. A blueprint for building soldiers who'd obey even after death. She'd spent years chasing ghosts. Now she carried the recipe that made them. At an outpost near the border, she found what passed for civilization: a broken antenna, a rusted generator, and an old sat phone locked inside a comms box. She bypassed the keypad, rewired the battery, and connected to a satellite band she'd memorized long ago, a civilian media channel buried beneath static. One number, one call, one decision. She hesitated. If she released the data, Ghost Division would collapse. The men who funded it, senators, generals, intelligence heads, would fall with it. But so would everyone still out there wearing the patch. The ones who believed they were saving the world. Her hand hovered over the dial. Then she whispered to herself. Morrison said, "Tell the story right." She pressed the button. Static filled the speaker. Then a voice answered, young, uncertain. International Tribune encrypted line. Who's calling? Lena's throat tightened. For years she hadn't spoken her real name. Now it sat like a stone behind her teeth. "This is Cross," she said finally. "Lena J. Cross, former Lieutenant SEAL Recon." A pause. Then the voice sharpened. "Ma'am, did you say SEAL?" "I need to send you something," she said. "It's classified. You'll want to make copies." "Copies?" the voice echoed, half confused, half intrigued. "You're blowing a whistle." Lena almost smiled. "Not a whistle," she said quietly. "A grave." She sent the file. Watch the signal bars crawl across the tiny screen. Each percentage felt like a heartbeat. 50, 70, 98. Then the connection cut. She froze. The bar stopped at 99. No, come on. The phone went dead. Battery fried. Signal lost. She stared at it, jaw tight, until the silence felt louder than gunfire. Maybe the transmission made it. Maybe it didn't. Maybe truth only needed 99% to survive. Night found her in the ruins of an old checkpoint. She built a small fire, more for the company than the warmth. From her pouch she pulled the tags, all 90, plus one etched with mercy. They clinked softly as she laid them out in a row. One by one, she ran her fingers over the names. Her brothers, her ghosts, her teachers in silence. Then she added the last one. Morrison. A scrap of metal she'd cut from a shell casing, his initials carved with the tip of her knife. She stared at it for a long moment, the flames reflected in her eyes. "You bought me time," she whispered. "I hope I spent it right." For the first time in years, she allowed herself to close her eyes without reaching for a weapon. Dreams came slowly, like reluctant visitors. In them she saw Echo Team, alive, laughing, sunburned and loud. Daniels flipping cards. Tor's singing off-key. Riley making coffee that could strip paint. And Morrison, standing at the edge of it all, smiling the way commanders never get to. When she woke, tears had dried on her cheeks. The fire was gone. Only the faintest orange glow on the horizon remained, not from dawn, but from war somewhere far away. She packed the tags, slung her rifle, and started walking. 2 days later, in a city far from the desert, a journalist opened a corrupted file labeled Echo Ghostzip. Half the data unreadable, but the rest clear enough. Memos, contracts, mission logs, and one audio file. A woman's voice, calm, steady. "If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. They built us to be invisible. But every ghost leaves a shadow. Don't look for me. Look for what comes next." The story spread quietly at first. Then it caught fire. Within a week, agencies were denying involvement. Within 2, committees were forming. By the 3rd, Ghost Division ceased to exist, at least officially. And somewhere, far from the headlines, a woman watched the fallout from a distance. Lena stood on a ridge overlooking the sea. Cold wind whipped at her jacket. Below, the surf crashed against dark stone, relentless, unending. She followed the sound all the way here, not for escape, but for balance. The ocean didn't lie. It took what it wanted, gave nothing back, and never pretended to be fair. In that it was honest. She dropped her pack, pulled the pouch from her pocket, and unfastened it. One by one, she tossed the tags into the waves. Each splash small, final. When she reached the one marked Mercy, she hesitated. Then she tied it around her wrist. Because mercy, she decided, wasn't something you throw away. It was something you earned every day you didn't pull the trigger. She stayed there until sunset. When the first stars appeared, she whispered to the horizon. They asked who hunts us now. Maybe no one. Maybe that's the point. She turned inland, the faint outline of a small village visible in the fading light, children playing, laughter carried by the wind. She smiled. Not the cold, hard smile of a sniper, but the quiet, tired one of someone who finally understood what it meant to stop running. She began walking toward the lights. Behind her, the tide erased her footprints. Ahead, a new sound replaced the echo of gunfire, the simple rhythm of life continuing. Months passed. In some places, her story became myth. In others, classified rumor. But among soldiers, it was gospel. They said the woman who hunted the hunters vanished into peace. They said sometimes, when battles went bad and hope went thin, a single bullet would find its mark from nowhere, clean, silent, merciful. They called it the cross shot. A ghost's final promise. One evening, long after the last report faded from the news, a young recruit at a coastal training base found an envelope tucked beneath his bunk. No return address. Inside, a photograph. A woman standing on a cliff above the sea. Face half turned. Wind in her hair. The tag on her wrist catching the sunlight. On the back, 3 words written in careful script. Still watching, L. The recruit stared at it for a long time. He didn't know her story. But he felt it, the quiet certainty that somewhere, somehow, someone still stood guard between the world and the monsters it made. He folded the photograph, placed it in his pocket, and whispered what soldiers have whispered since war began. Stay safe out there. Far out on the horizon, a lone figure sat on a cliff's edge, rifle beside her, eyes fixed on the sea. The wind brushed against her hair, carrying the sound of waves and distant laughter. She closed her eyes and breathed. No orders. No ghosts. No vengeance. Just silence, the kind she'd fought her whole life to deserve. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than the surf. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Then she stood, slung her rifle one last time, and walked into the fading light. A shadow returning to the world it had once protected.